Hello, Angela.
Hi, Karina.
Hi. This is an absolute pleasure to have you on today. I'm so grateful that you would give some time and energy to this conversation. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anything for you, Karina?
For those of you that haven't had the honor and the pleasure of meeting Angela before, Angela is a bit of a legend at Southern School. She may not know this because she's so humble, but of all the students that come through Southern School, everyone is left with such a lovely impression from their time in clinic if they've been able to have a clinic session with Angela, not just because we start each session with Qigong with Angela, which is really amazing, but just the way that she helps to get us in tune with the tactile stuff and the feeling stuff and really connecting into the energy of the patient, which when you're studying Chinese medicine at an institution or a university, sometimes you really can just be so in your head and it's so academic and dry that you forget about all of this flow that needs to be dropped into and the embodiment of the practice. And I think that what Angela has brought has just been magical. And if you ever come across someone else that's been to Southern School and we speak about Angela, we're just like, oh, Angela, we love her. So I'm not sure if you knew that. Maybe you
I
do,
didn't
but
know that.
yeah,
It's very
you've touched many
fascinating.
hearts.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Karina.
Hmm. I was wondering if maybe we could start with you sharing a little bit about your practice history. I know that there's a lot of things that you do and a lot of training that you've done, and I only know a little bit of it. And I was wondering if you might share some of that with us.
Okay.
Hmm.
Well, I guess it all began a long time ago when I studied nursing. And I studied nursing after schooling, and I actually nursed for 20 years. But there were probably three things that occurred in my nursing career that kind of I had incredible questions about in relation to nursing, in relation to health. And I'll tell you about those. But then there was a fourth thing, and that was after the third thing, I met a woman serendipitously. It was like a miracle of fate. And she told me about the Southern School of Natural Therapies. And I was working in the operating theatre at the Royal Women's Hospital at the time. And, I would be watching the patients and working with the surgeons and other nurses and looking after the patients in recovery and asking the patients to sign their consent forms before their procedures. And part of my role was we'd vary collecting their consent forms and then scrubbing and scouting in the operating theatres. But I used to be fascinated when I'd say, have you signed your consent form when they come up for their pre-meds, pre-op medications? And I would say to them, have you signed the form and do you know what the doctor's going to do? And so frequently they would say things like, no, but I trust the doctor. Whatever the doctor does, that's fine with me. And I'd say to them, do you know you're going in for a curette and you might come out without a uterus and ovaries? Do you know that
Hmm.
that's what you're signing for? And they'd say, uh, whatever the doctor thinks, I'll accept that. So there was this really bizarre situation because then I would be going into the theatre and watching the behaviour of surgeons and what goes on in the operating theatre. And I just thought to myself, is this all there is? Is this in the sacredness of my human female body?
Mm.
Is this, if something goes wrong with me, is this all that's available for me to hand it over to, well, with all due respect, but to hand it over with what I viewed as butchery? And it was quite
Mm.
bizarre. And then this wonderful woman that I met in the course of the housing place where I was living, Anna Lamaro, she was studying naturopathy at the Southern School. And she said to me, she told me what she was doing. And I said, is there such a thing? It's like, what? You mean there's more to health than what I've been witnessing all these years? And so she introduced me to the Southern School, and I rang them the next day after meeting her and speaking with her, and they delivered me a book called The Science and Practice of Iridology, which is really a wonderful book on the history of naturopathic medicine.
Wow.
And I enrolled immediately, and I have never looked back. And, it's like it opened an incredible window to health and a truth and a richness, and it brought the soul and the spirit and the Shen. It brought a fullness, and it just opened my heart. And that was the beginning of the journey.
What year was that, Angela, when you first heard about Southern School? Because they've been around for quite a while,
It was
right?
1976.
Wow.
And the Southern School has just had its 60th anniversary. So that was really 45 years ago.
That's
Um,
amazing.
and I started the very next year. I was enrolled immediately, and it was absolutely mind
Yeah.
opening. Um, yeah, and we were studying anatomy and physiology and science and pathology, and we were studying the body, but it had a philosophy behind it. And
Mm.
it was much more than just this kind of really reductionist way of looking at stuff. It was just so eye-opening and so illuminating and so glorious that it just transformed my world.
And did you continue nursing? Were you doing nursing alongside learning naturopathy, or did you end that
Well,
at that
well,
time?
no. Well, at the time, the thing was, thanks to nursing, I was able to pay the fees because there were no such thing as HECS and all that kind of stuff, fee help. At the time, you had to pay for fees. It was all full fees. So I continued to work in agency nursing all around Melbourne hospitals during those years of my training. I stayed there
Wow.
until I completed my training, and it was only after the I got yeah, it was after the pregnancy, after the when I went on, I was pregnant with my second son, and at the end of during the I'm just trying to think back. It's a long time ago, but I was working at this stage in a nursing home, and I went on maternity leave just to open the window in case I wanted to come back. But at the same time I went on maternity leave, I decided that I wouldn't be doing any more. I wouldn't return after
Mm.
um, the pregnancy.
Wow.
So then I gave my whole, the rest of my life has then been transformed into, working as a naturopath acupuncturist. I mean, because the thing about naturopathy in those days were that the whole philosophy of healing was one where at the Southern School you came out with a diploma. They were only diplomas at the time, but you studied nutritional medicine, you studied herbal medicine, you studied either and massage osteopathy, you studied homeopathy, and the culmination of it all was and then you would study acupuncture. There was possibility to study acupuncture there. Melbourne College of Acupuncture came in to the premises in our third year, in our fourth year actually, and you could do study acupuncture in your fourth year because they accepted that you'd done those previous years' studies for all the kind of sciences. And so you came out with this integrated approach to working on the physical, to working on the emotional, energetic, internal organ function,
Mm.
nutritional medicine function, energetics with homeopathy and acupuncture. And in the end, the encouragement was practice yoga and meditation to integrate it all and to continue that process of self-cultivation. So it was a glorious way of integration. And so in a
Yeah.
certain sense, things have changed enormously now because every one of those individual disciplines have a whole degree course on their own. And so, and they got registered. Osteopathy chiropractic became registered. I mean, I got a diploma in osteopathy as well,
Wow.
and acupuncture. And so when registration came along, and then the big individual disciplines started to develop and more research was done on them. It just meant that you had to make a distinction between which area you wanted to focus on. But it was very hard to kind of, once the whole egg is in place, you can't kind of disassemble the constitutive elements out of it. So it's like I'm looking through the lens of a person's energy. I'm looking through the lens of a person's nutritional status, lifestyle status. I'm looking at the structural nature of them. I'm looking at the influence of what the impact of no exercise does, too much exercise does. I'm looking at through the lens at each patient that I see with a kind of a scanning view to identify where do I begin to serve this person and to steer them and to work with them.
Gosh, there's so much I would love to comment on in what you just said. That diploma sounds so rich, and that all of these different facets were included. I think sometimes when we talk about Chinese medicine, often we remark about how it's different from Western medicine because we're able to look at an entire person's systems in one consultation. Of course, we might be having a series of treatments to then work on a plan to bring them back to some kind of balance. Whereas in Western medicine, people tend to just focus on one specialty, so they may not really have an integrated sense of how the rest of the systems work together. But thinking about this diploma that you did, and then how all of those separate parts have been pulled out into their own stream, I think about the students that are coming through the school now and how interesting it must be for you to look at the way that it's structured compared to the way you did your studies. And Angela and I have had the privilege of working together in the clinic at Southern School and developing this lovely relationship, and how challenging it is sometimes for the students to do an intake with a patient and have all these systematic approaches on how we try and glean information and then come to a working diagnosis and then figure out how we're going to treat. And even though this medicine is so wildly holistic, it can feel sometimes that it's very regimented, maybe, if I don't have a better word to describe that, regimented when you are trying to learn it at school in this current day. Maybe that's why you've been so influential on the students that I know that have come through, and myself included, helping to bridge that gap between the modern day of trying to learn about this medicine in a school setting and all of the other facets that come into the role of healing and the role of facilitating someone's health.
Yeah.
Does that kind of come up for you a lot when you're watching the students come through these days?
No, and yes. There's always so many sides to it. You can see what a person's kind of Shen is doing in a way. You see where a person wants to focus and what they have to do to get through the course. So some people don't want to be distracted by that kind of apparent kind of peripheral wholeness. Some people just want to go straight and stay straight to hold themselves together for their own reasons so they can get through the course. And so I respect that each individual has to go through the journey they have to go through to get to where they want to get, for whatever reason is underneath that. So some people are so receptive, like people like yourself. You often find people who go through the course who are just really mature, and there's a deeper kind of wisdom underneath that they can recognize. And some people are just so filled with desperation to get through for their own kind of reasons. They may not be receptive to that bigger stuff. So I kind of respect that you can't put extra fluid in the cup when there's no more room. There's only room for more when there's room.
Yeah, I used to call that the brain sponge. When the brain sponge was sopping wet, that you can't put any more liquid in that.
No. And I think it's like in clinic. I mean, everything is like constantly, whether it's as a teacher or as a, as um, a practitioner, a clinician, you're constantly scanning all the data, the non-spoken data, um,
Mm,
and that information is valuable because from Chinese medicine perspective, that information can be categorized in terms of the eight guiding principles. Excess, deficient, hot, cold, yin yang, damp, all those kind of factors. You can see them at play, and you may not have the language to describe them, but when you see them, you can say, okay, well, this is it can guide how you respond.
yeah, it's such a marathon. It's such a marathon to get through the course. And everybody just has to figure out how they get through it. And then there can be this feeling of, oh, okay, now I'm allowed to check in a little bit more with what I resonate with, where I want to flow, what I want to brush up on. And it almost feels like at that point you're allowed to really step into the practice as you. But until then, it's just a rite of passage that you've got to go through, and everyone's got to go through it. And it is challenging, but that's the only way to do it. I think about yoga and I think about Chinese medicine in similar ways, in that the traditional way of learning yoga, it was lineage based, as was Chinese medicine. It was lineage based. So you would have been learning probably from one teacher or teachers
Apprentice.
that were in your family. Yeah, apprentice style. And I wouldn't want it on my shoulders to be the person that tries to now create a modern curriculum for how that is translated to groups of people, in the same way that yoga teacher trainings are trying to do that with groups of people and standardize things and create formats for things. I don't think that I could. I don't think that I could do that. And I think that places that offer that, it just has to be that way, and
I
you've
don't
just got to
know.
go through it.
I don't think that is so. I mean, maybe it's the naive concept, but I think that has to be so because it has to satisfy government and economic guidelines. It has to fit in with that kind of criteria. Obviously, you want that because people want funding. But prior to that, people worked hard to get what they wanted, but it was not a consumer item then either. There was a deeper kind of quest of spirituality or whatever you might like to call it, but there was a deeper quest that called people into the profession. And pretty much most people were quite mature. They were past, oh, well, I was 21 when I started naturopathy. Um, and so I guess I call that different to those people who come out of year 12, for example. I'd had a nursing experience before that. Most people who came into naturopathy at the time, I was younger. A lot of people were much older than me, and most of the people come in from previous careers.
Mm.
And so, if a course was to be delivered now, the fundamental principles of what were there in that original course would be the foundational stuff because it's kind of like the five koshas, the levels of subtlety, from subtlety to density. It seems that if you take that into consideration and realize the vastness of the vastness of things in that context, it is possible. And I think it makes it easier for students to kind of realize that you do have to study the sciences because it identifies the place where they fit in, and it allows a kind of an architecture to reveal itself,
Mm.
because it then gives you that, like for example, here's another course that's happening now, and that is at the Shiatsu College, which is another place where I teach. And they teach a diploma of Shiatsu and Oriental therapies. And so the interesting thing is part of the curriculum there is that you do self-cultivating exercise. It's embedded in the curriculum to say, for you to work through the demands of all the sciences that you have to study and all the particular areas and techniques that you have to learn, it's wise not only to think about what we're teaching you, but what you need to engender in yourself through your own cultivation of understanding the energetics. Because it's the
Mm.
deeper energetics that can't be taught, they have to be You know, they have to be worked through, they have to be practiced. So I think, you know, I don't think the courses really do make, the sciences make enormous, um, they give enormous power. I mean, for example, I say that because I just think about, you know, for example, the size of a dollar, you know, a dollar in your skin, you know, it's got something like 500 million cells. You know, it's got a meter of blood vessels and lymph vessels. Now, once you think about the wisdom of what's going on deep down in tiny areas of our being, is this sophisticated wisdom that is
Mm.
incomprehensible to the visual naked eye. But if you learn the science behind that and you practice some meditation, or you practice, you know, experiences of sitting still, simply being an observer, you can come to experience the magnitude of that.
Yeah,
And it
that's
wouldn't
that
be so hard.
embodiment. Mm.
Pardon?
I said, that's that embodiment that I was referring to at the beginning. You know,
Right.
anybody can read the books, but there needs to be this secondary process of learning where it moves through you and it becomes your own knowledge. And a lot of people from Southern School will go over to the Shiatsu College because they're seeking that and they feel like that is missing because there's only so much that you can do at one place.
Yeah.
And they want that, they want to really dive into the felt senses and to have that really embodied experience of the medicine, as well as learning the technicalities and the sciences of the medicine, which is great. I mean, it makes their study take a little bit longer, but they often come out and they're just so well rounded, and they do have really good ingrained self-cultivation practices, and it's so important.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really, really observing that in myself now. I graduated at the end of 2019, just before it all got wild. It was good timing. But
Congratulations.
yeah, but even now, and um, things have definitely slowed down, but having that daily connection to self, having that daily anchorage or whatever it is that you practice, it's not a luxury. It's non-negotiable for me. It has to happen because how I that's my through line for everything that I have to offer. That's my way of coming back to zero. I wouldn't be able to stay in a grounded, centered place holding space for other people if I wasn't doing that every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you
Yeah.
teach at the Shiatsu College as well. And when did the Shiatsu part of the story come about? So you've done this incredibly rich diploma, and you're a you're a woman of all sorts of trades and all sorts of healing skills. Your tool belt is fat with tools. Where does the Shiatsu fit in?
Oh, well, there's another highway that I took. I was studying martial arts, and I was studying karate under Tino Cebrano. And Tino, there was a Miyagi 30th anniversary tournament in Japan. So Tino asked some of his students if they would like to participate in that international tournament in Japan. And I was really keen to go, but it turned out that I thought, I don't want to just go for the tournament for 3 weeks. If I'm going to go somewhere as remarkable as Japan, I'm going to stay there for longer. So I went over into the tournament, and then I kind of made provisions to stay in Japan for another year rather than coming straight home. And so in the course of that, I met all these karate people and karate teachers. And I met one of the when I went off to the airport to say goodbye to them all, I was going to be left alone to travel Japan, explore this foreign exotic country by myself. And then but then the other karate teacher says, we will look after you, we will show you, we will take you to our schools and such like that. And so I ended up going there and meeting and finally, in fact, marrying a Japanese karate instructor, and then having a couple of children. And so, in the course of then living in Japan, um, I studied, once I had a baby, I wasn't interested in doing karate so much because my body had changed. I wanted something softer. So I kind of met an acupuncturist actually over there, serendipitously. Everything is serendipitous, like these, I call them miracles of fate, because they kind of like a door opens and you decide spontaneously either to go there or not. And this was a wonderful one where I met this acupuncturist. I was having some acupuncture treatment in Japan, and he was telling me about this Zen archery sensei, who he talked about Zen archery. He was an archer as well. That's Kyudo. He talked about him, and I was so enthralled because I thought, I can't do karate anymore. I don't want to do it. It's so kind of tough. I didn't want to punch and kick and do all this kumite anymore. But this guy talked to me about this teacher, and he said, look, I will introduce him to you. And if you get introduced to him, he may allow you to come in and be a student of Zen archery. So we had this conversation with him, and then he said to me, okay, come along. Come along to my studio, and I will work out whether you can do Zen archery or not, or whether I will teach you Zen archery or not. So he said to come along, and when I went along, there was three other people there, because he had this wonderful range, a shooting range, a Zen archery shooting range at the back of his house on the foothills in Kyoto. And they were there practicing, and he said, you just sit there while they were doing their practice. And he was just watching them and so forth. And he ignored me completely. And then I was there for, pretty restless for 2 hours. And then he said, you can go now. But he said, come back next week.
Right.
And so, okay. So I said, all right. Next week I came back, and I had to do the same thing. He made me sit there. And then, or, just hang around there watching. He said, just watch. So I did this for about 4 weeks. And then the next time, the fifth time I went there, he gave me the broom and he said, sweep the floor. And so it was an old, and then one of the students said, Angela, that's a good sign. After that, after he saw my form in sweeping the floor, it must have been a success, because he invited me back. And the following week, he gave me a practice bow, so I could pick up the bow and get a shape of it. Anyway, so I took on this Zen archery, and I was starting to get very enthralled by the Japanese arts, and I thought, oh, he was interested in then what I was doing in my massage and naturopathic history that I'd had some knowledge about. And he said, well, have you done any shiatsu? And so I went to Japan. While I was in Japan, I then he introduced me to this teacher who was teaching shiatsu. And so the teacher of shiatsu said, yes, you can learn shiatsu with me. We went through a course with him and some other people. And then there was a big story of that. But there was, I got exposure to working with shiatsu then. And when I came back to Australia after a few years there in Japan, I decided to get a qualification in shiatsu. So I went to the Shiatsu College. That's how I came to be in the Shiatsu College. That's the long story.
Wow.
And then, of course, I
Great
thought I
story.
wanted to get a qualification in shiatsu because I can do it, but I didn't have any paperwork. So I had to get that. I wanted the paperwork. So the Shiatsu College said to me, the directors at the time, they said to me, and I'd talked to them about what I'd been doing and such like that. And they said, yes, you can do some subjects here and we'll give you a qualification. But considering what you've done and what you've told us, would you be happy to teach some of the subjects here too?
Just straight away.
I was
They
straight
wanted
away
you on board.
the teacher again. That's just the organic nature of how things flow.
Wow. So both at the Shiatsu College and Southern School of Natural Therapies, you've been a student and now you are a teacher, a facilitator. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that history runs really deep for you at Southern
yes.
School. There's a lot of deep roots, a lot of deep connection.
Yes. Yes. And a lot has changed. And I like to think a lot has remained the same, in a certain sense.
Yeah, I feel like it's a really important place. I feel that it represents a lot, and you could probably speak more to that because of what we've just established, that you've got this deep connection with the history of it. But to kind of help us stay connected to the essence of health in a way that's really nourishing and holistic and beneficial and high vibration, I think that place is a really important keeper of that.
Well, I guess I think it may be the people who are in there, because I think the institution, I think as long as there is Shen there, like if there are people who bring in the concept of Shen and hold that there and keep that deeply rooted without losing that into the kind of the whole kind of reductionist academic field. We need the academics, we need the reductionism, but we also need the integration of the holism. And I think that's what makes it so rich for me. The fact is that the philosophies behind Chinese medicine, behind naturopathy, behind natural therapies, Southern School of Natural Therapies, there are philosophies behind them that are upheld by Shen, by a concept of reaching a higher state of consciousness, reaching a higher state of uh, inclusiveness and a sense of kind of interconnection with the whole, interconnection between the individual and the world around, individual, like this kind of, like it's traditional wisdom. And that is the stuff that in traditional wisdom lies Shen. There's a recognition that, the galaxies in the cosmos have been around witnessing us, and so has the earth on the ground witnessed. It's been around a long time. It's holding us up, and it's there for us. And I think a place like the Southern School and the Australian Shiatsu College, they foster concepts that enable people to kind of really place themselves in the midst of all of that. And I think that's the essence, like that's where people go to when they feel like there's something missing in the general kind of medical kind of reductionist approach. And so it fills the gap. And of course, most of our patients come to us because we fill the gap for them. Many of them, they see it in their own doctors and specialists and so forth. But they come because there's only so much that Western medicine can do when it doesn't have a concept of Shen.
Yes. Oh, so beautifully said. So beautifully said. And it sounds to me in those words you've just shared that the thing that really connects us to the universe and the thing that really connects us to the earth and to each other is spirit. And where there is spirit, there is heart. I mean, the Shen resides in the heart. That's what we're cultivating. And if we're only in the intellect, or we've kind of become disconnected from that, what is it that fuels or holds the flame or the torch for us to continue staying connected and not becoming so disconnected or isolated from each other, which is a real battle at the moment. I think people are now trying to find these new ways of staying connected, not only to their own inner being, maybe for the very first time, starting to have a real relationship with themselves when they're not able to distract themselves with all the things that they used to do to maybe numb out or to keep themselves occupied so they didn't have to pay attention to the things that were rising up inside, but also not actually being able to necessarily see other people, travel and connect. How do we keep the flame of our Shen alive and alight when we are facing these kinds of obstacles of disconnection? Oh, I've just taken us on a totally new line of thinking, but it just felt like really relevant with what you just said.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, that's very interesting, Karina. So many things. I think the fundamental thing is it's a valuable thing in terms of connection because it's about our heart. Our heart needs to connect. And the function of our lives is such that you know, chi, energy is generated through interaction, with things, with the outside world, with each other. I think for a long time we've been disconnected from things, because we're just become these consumers. The freedoms we've had to eat whatever we want, do whatever we want, feel as free as we ever want to be. We've taken for granted some of those. And basically we're just asleep or awake, and we're running around habitually living our lives. And I think this is a wake-up call. The fact that you find that suddenly things aren't as they were. Obviously, all these dangers, the symbol of danger is about opportunity. And an important kind of signal here is to say stop. It's really saying stop. So I would encourage people to just sit still for at least 24 minutes a day and just stop. And stop long enough to observe the fact that, as I mentioned, that dollar coin size has got so much neurological information in there. So I think if we didn't have this interruption that's happening now with, let's say, COVID, if we didn't have this interaction where people are suddenly thrust into a state of change, it's just a reminder that way back in ancient Chinese medicine, the book of changes, the I Ching, talked about the fact this is just part of life, change. We were habituated into luxurious kind of pleasures that now it's really coming back to our senses and being aware that being still is a valuable way to come back home to your deeper self, to know that in that place the universe resides deep inside, because in this temporal changing period of time lies eternity. And with our Shen lies eternity. So as much as it's allowing a lot of emotional stuff to arise, I mean, this is the richness of the medicine we practice, underpinned by the concept of Shen, underpinned by the concept that we are living in a space for a short period of time, surrounded by eternal witnesses, like the cosmos, the sky, and the galaxy and the earth, and the elements of the wind and the trees and the plants and so forth. So I think it's an important full stop to say, hey, just pop on your cushion now and think about giving yourself stillness. I mean, to kind of
Love that.
reiterate that, I have these marvelous kind of models. My teachers are really the huntswans, those big spiders that come up and climb on the wall
Oh,
and they sit
they're
there.
your teachers.
Yeah, I love them
Okay.
because they often sit on a
They are
wall.
not my teachers.
They
Go
often
ahead.
sit on a wall. You just watch them. They often sit on a wall and they can sit there. I've watched them for 3 weeks in the same spot. Like they're on a big Vipassana, 3-week Vipassana. They do not move. And every now and again, then when they move, something happens. The weather changes, or there's going to be rain. So
Right.
it's like they are, I think, what's going on in them for those 3 weeks? They're there. They're still there. They're still there. What's going on? How can they be a witness like that? And I just think that is absolutely remarkable. And then, of course, I've talked to you about my favourite friends, the tawny frogmouths, who sit in the trees down along Merry Creek. And they're entertainers because they're very funny. Because each time I go down to see them, again, I see these as incredible teachers. And they hang around the same kind of trees, but there's almost like they play hidey with me. They say things like, I think I'm going to go and find them today. And then, of course, they're not there. And then I just think, okay, so they've gone shopping or something like that. And I'll just hang around and watch. And then every now and again, they're sitting on a nook on the side of a tree somewhere nearby, as though they're saying, see, I'm just playing with you now. You've had to be patient and observe. And I think that's what, it's a beautiful time for us to kind of stand there and see that nature is operating very carefully.
Yeah.
And another thing, another really interesting thing, I think, kind of physiologically, we've got four parts to our nervous system. If you think about, we've got this kind of, we've got voluntary movement, which is kind of like, the different parts of the brain. So it deals with voluntary movement, it deals with kind of perception and homeostasis. And that's kind of like much of how our nervous system works. And there's a fourth part, which is abstract kind of reasoning, which is our human thinking capabilities that allows us to kind of perceive and analyze and think. We give that so much priority when in actual fact it can only operate at least at the probably very most 5%. The other 95% of our consciousness is outsourced into proprioception, homeostasis, and voluntary actions like our movements of our hands and faces and expressions and things. And I think we give so much emphasis to its power when in actual fact, sitting still gives you access to the power of the other 95% of our physiological, neurological consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's so
Right.
exciting to sit still and just allow it to emerge. Because we're so busy talking.
Busy talking.
Thinking this is the answer, that's the solution, this is this, I can fix it.
Yeah. Or trying to find out the information. Like there's this real need to know. There's a lot of anxiety around the not knowing, being in unknown territory and trying to project out potential speculatory maybes. A lot of energy goes into that. A lot of energy is going into that right now.
Yeah.
And maybe one of the big struggles when people are trying to begin a relationship with that stillness or a meditative practice without it having to have even a formal technique is it does take some time being able to get into that place where you're just watching the same way that you might be watching the huntsman, which you can totally do. I'm not going to take those on board as my teachers. Thank you very much. Or watching the tawny frog mouse or watching the trees or watching the sky. For me, that the gift that meditation has given me as you chip away, is being able to find yourself moving further away from the things that pass through your mind and recognize that those things kind of have nothing to do with you. They're not who you really are. They're not the essence of your being. They're just the stuff that floats through. But if you haven't found that distance between the stuff and a calm place to sit and watch yet, you just get dragged around.
Oh, yeah. In the turbulence. Yeah. You're just
in the turbulence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the tsunami. Indeed.
I'm not sure what those spider teachers are doing in your place different to my place. I only maybe get a huntsy in every blue moon. But the thing I find difficult about a huntsman spider is that you'll see them on the wall.
Yes.
You'll turn away
and
then you turn back and they're gone.
Yes.
Which then automatically they must be on my face, right? So then
yeah,
it makes me feel really unsettled.
I do. But, I have to say to you,
yeah.
It's true. What's worse than the scariness of seeing a huntsman, is in fact not seeing it.
Correct.
You're quite right. Where is it now?
Away from me. Yeah. Although I've been told they're a good omen for finance. So.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
My mum used to always say, if you see a huntsman inside, it's because it's about to rain. And that was usually true.
Yes. And it always signals to me to get the washing in.
Yeah.
Yeah. In
they're
the
just
work
looking for a dry place.
What's that?
They're just looking, I said they're just looking for dry land. And maybe, well, the other day when it poured rain, my house was full of these gigantic mosquitoes. And I thought, that's probably why the spiders come inside, because all the food goes into the dry place. And they're just clever. They know they've got to survive.
They know.
They know.
They know.
They're not emotional about it. They just do it.
Well, they experience it. They allow their systems, all those other aspects of their nervous systems, however they are constructed, they respond. They go with the Tao. They know. They go with the flow. You know, we're the only creatures that don't go with the flow. We go against the flow.
And how we suffer from trying to, no, I will decide which way we're going here. Like in the times of my life where I have struggled the most, it's because I have latched onto a notion about what I should be doing. And I critique that word a lot because I think it gets us all into trouble. It's got to be this way. And I push and I shove and I grind and I sweat and I don't understand why it's not coming with ease until it gets to a point where I've worn down enough that I let go. And in the letting go, I've always flowed into the most amazing, abundant circumstances where all sorts of things have come to me, and there's still been hard work in there, but it hasn't felt like it's been so difficult. It hasn't worn me down. That's when I know that I'm going with that Taoist notion. That's when I know I'm in flow.
Yes.
But you've got to be able to let go of those moments and think, okay, well, I thought in my little small self that it was this, but who am I to say that that's what it is? There's something already written for me. I have to just be able to adapt and flow with that and surrender. And maybe that's what a lot of the struggle is at the moment too. This struggling against what is happening, trying to control what is happening and not being able to kind of just go without being completely pessimistic or defeatist, but simply go, what will be, will be. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. How can I stay grounded? How can I take care of my Shen and my calm state of mind, my own being, whilst we flow wherever we're going?
In a way, I think there's more to it too, though, than that, or as well as that, Karina, because acceptance is kind of one part of it, but I think I kind of like that notion of Wu Wei and Ziran, that kind of, that Taoist stuff of the Taoist kind of ethics of saying we have to let go and we have to do nothing and accept. But in a sense, it doesn't mean that we have to accept everything. It means that it doesn't mean we have to let go of everything. It means that we let go of what is not necessary. And a part of our deeper Shen knows what that is if we give it time to get, if we cultivate that. And the doing nothing means that you're not reacting, like there's a pre-reflexive part of the self that is beyond the reactivity. If we can kind of get below that, then we can be spontaneous in the way we act and the way in the things that we do, because it's the practice that allows one to tap in, to know, and to kind of read the future, in the sense of like the mosquitoes and the hunts ones, like they read the future in the sense that they just read the present, like they read their place in eternity, and they can perceive the kind of intrinsic kind of subtle movements of shift that occur in time, but in eternity, in temporality and eternity simultaneously, which seems a bit, I mean, words never convey the essence of its power, though. I think so. Rather than think things are going to, I just have to accept the way things are because that's the way they are, they're going to change. But I think we have to do some training in realizing that now we certainly do, but we can't just let go of anything and leave it to the, whatever. It's a never ending task to remain alert, but not attached, to remain neutral, to sit there with the open hand of fate and say, there are tasks we never should lose sight of, and that is our own kind of self responsibility to the life that we've been granted.
Yeah, I like that. Being alert, but not necessarily attached.
Yeah.
And so maybe this not doing and just sitting the 10 to 20 minutes a day is actually the best tool that we have to connect us to Wu Wei as a
Absolutely.
practice.
I think so. I think there's an enormous amount in that, Karina.
I meet a lot of people that want to start a meditation practice because I work a lot with yoga teacher trainees and I've taught a lot of yogis before. And sometimes it's really overwhelming to start a meditation practice because you think you've got to have this certain technique and I don't want to do it wrong. And it can be really overwhelming. There's a lot out there. But just that act of, which is not simple, just that act of, I don't want to downplay it, of sitting and doing nothing.
Yeah.
Could maybe be the most profound thing you've ever done.
Oh, absolutely. Quite so, Karina. And I
And
think
now if a huntsman spider walks into my house, I'm going to have a completely different kind of relationship to them because, well, they're like a master of the universe now, aren't they? Completely present, feeling the changes and responding in flow.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you know the thing about meditation, there's something interesting about meditation. I think, and I kind of don't like using the word much because I see it's a word. And you see, when we have words, people give them associations. So we turn them into something else. Our mind goes in, and, like as you said, it's kind of like there's so many different styles of doing that. So once you give a word to something, because frequently people say things like, I can't meditate, I've tried, it doesn't work, all these kinds of things. It's like, so there's this word that people say that is, I think is quite remarkable, that they say, I can't do this word. So that's why I like the idea of just sitting still. And I wouldn't say do nothing so much, but sitting still and don't do anything. Just sit still, and you might have to use these resources from time to time, like use a clock to say, okay, I'm going to limit it this so I know I'm not here for eternity, but I'm putting a little pocket, I'm putting a little kind of a pocket of time into this, and I'm just going to develop a little bit of discipline. I mean, when you're playing the piano, once you learn the notes, you've got to learn how to play the quavers and the various kind of chords and the various kinds of different components of putting music together. And it requires practice.
Yeah.
So sitting on a cushion still requires practice. And the funniest thing is, isn't it? People say, I haven't got time to do that. I'm too busy, busy, busy. And yet everyone's complaining because they're too busy, busy, busy. When in fact, when you ask people to be still, it's like, oh no, I better get up because I've got something to do. It's very hard to sit still for a short period of time. But I think you're right. Yeah, give people 10 minutes and say that's enough. I like the 24-minute thing.
Yeah. I heard you say 24 before. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Ellen Wallace calls it a gattaca. It's like it's for one, and I see it as 1 minute for every hour in the day. So it's like I just do 1 minute for every hour in the day, but I put them in a pocket, either in the morning or always in the morning. But it's a good idea then to do it in the evening. If your day is available to do that, it's nice to do it, at the beginning and end of your day, to get a routine. And of course, once you do that, if you get a pocket like that, you do that little bit of a practice. I think that it's a bit like anything grows. You plant a seed and something happens.
And something interesting happens if you have begun to do that and you don't really know how it's affecting you yet. And then you have a period of time where you don't do it. There's this nice chapter that Jon Kabat-Zinn writes about where he says, not practicing is also practicing. People give themselves a really hard time if they're not rolling out their yoga mat or they're not sitting on their cushion. And I say to them, instead of giving yourself a guilt trip, just treat the non-practicing time as your practice as well. So you really feel the difference between when you are incorporating this practice into your routine and when you're not. And that's going to probably make you feel more connected to doing it, because when it falls away, it affects you. I had a period of maybe a month where I wasn't doing any daily practice because I had a new fur baby to look after and I was quite anxious and it just kind of fell away. It's so weird. In times of intensity, often your self-care, goodness, it's the first thing to go, and it's the thing you really need. I'm still working on that. And I just desperately needed my practice back. So I just had to make it happen. And now I'm much better. I feel much better. I know how much I need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's awareness, isn't it?
Mm.
It's awareness. You've got that awareness to be aware. If you're aware enough to say, I'm not practicing, but it's a lovely thing to be able to say, oh, I'm aware that I haven't practiced and I'm feeling bad, but I'm aware that being aware is a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to intercept the habits of the habits of avoiding avoiding the awareness.
Yeah. And reprioritizing, as you said before, people might say, I'm too busy for that. But when you really get a sense of how 10 minutes or 30 minutes or 24 minutes of something can change the whole feeling of the day, then your priorities shift and you look at the day and you think, well, all these things that I thought were really important, actually, all of that is to the side until I have reset myself or I've checked in with myself. I've ground into myself. I've cleared everything. And then I can begin. Then I'm ready for work. Then I'm ready to see patients or be in a relationship or walk the dog or whatever it might be, feed the cat. Yeah.
You mean being organized?
Be organized. I'm ready to enter. I'm ready to get into the day.
Yeah.
Mm. Wow. Oh, I feel like we could talk on and on, which you and I definitely could because we have such a lovely connection. But it feels like this is a good time to end this for today. Thank you so much for sharing with me and for all of the listeners some of your amazing story. I can just tell there are so many more stories in there, just like the Japan story with the archery and how all these lovely little organic things have come to be in your life and all of the things that you have to share. Are you currently treating patients, Angela? Do you still work as a clinician? Are you offering treatments?
I'm still working. In fact, this morning, one of my jobs is working at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, and that had been closed down during COVID. But because so many people are so kind of in need, they've opened up. I just work as a volunteer out there,
Wow.
and with a team of acupuncturists, or in the health section. So they've got doctors and nurses and psychiatrists and physios and various other people there. So I'm out there, but I also consult from here and see clients because a lot of clients are so deeply in need of care now. So working, and if I can be of service to the world when there's suffering there, I mean, that's exactly what this profession is for. It serves people, and and be fearless. I mean, there are practicalities that one needs to take into consideration. As you've said, like the care that you take to manage things according to the circumstances. But it's not a time to be afraid. It's a time to really kind of to reach out and serve, because this is precisely where people's Shen and their souls are feeling vulnerable. And I just love that. It's a lovely way to be able to see how people their perspective can shift. Someone come in. Here's, for example, there's a client who comes in. She comes in every week. Comes into the place. She's very woody, so she comes in and she's talking and she's laughing and she's making all these noises, and then she's swearing and she's on the table, and she's then I never ask her any questions, and every now and again she comes in and said, "Don't ask me any questions. Don't do anything. Just let me speak. Let me do this." So I just observe her, and then I'll say, "Take your shoes off, hop on the table, and lie her down. I'll feel her pulse, and I'll start working on her, pericardium channel, and she'll lie down there, and then she just throws everything off, speaks and speaks. I don't have to say a thing. I know it's not necessary. And so we fiddle around, get my hands on her, do all this kind of stuff. And then something happens in terms of what happens. And then a choice of acupuncture points will be, considered. And so then I might put a point in or something, a needle in, and do something to it and ask her a question or such. And for example, this really disturbed person who's kind of reiterates the mess of her life, because she works in a profession where she's needed. So she's working with other people, and so she doesn't have to stay at home and such like that. So her business is operating. But by the end of it, she's just a completely different person. She's just, you can see the effect of just being able to step off that crazy runaway train of her life into a place where her nervous system then quietens down because of the power of some acupuncture needles and some hands and some sensory input. Her blood pressure sometimes will be, start off at 160 on 100. And at the end of a consultation, it can go down as far as 130 over 80. It's just phenomenal how things can change so quickly. And, when you see someone extreme like that, it's like, come to us, please, sir. As you know as well in your clinical work, people really need support, and we don't have to do much other than use these tools of our trade that are well known to be that we know through experience are thoroughly reliable, effective. Karina, I've lost your voice. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'll just edit that bit out. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is a great story and a great reminder of just how important it is to receive that care and support. And I don't know about you, but I definitely feel that the naturopaths and the homeopaths and the acupuncturists and the herbalists are all about to step up, are all about to really be needed more than they've ever been needed before. There's so much that's been bubbling away that we haven't even really seen yet in terms of mental health support and how what we've been through in the last year or so has affected us on so many levels. So,
well, interestingly, I think all we have to do is look back at a period in time during the Cultural Revolution. And I don't mean to go into too much detail on this, but if you have a look at what happened in times of the Cultural Revolution in China, when Mao was trying to lead the country and create that new revolution, he was kind of trying to get rid of the old traditions like Confucianism and Taoism and introduce this whole new system. And it actually did put society under enormous strain, and there was enormous chaos in that society at the time. I think there's a really interesting corollary here with what's going on in our current milieu here. So it's certainly there's going to be disruption and things are changing, but it's a really interesting thing how history keeps repeating itself. Certain things change, and it is very challenging. But again, the principles of Confucianism and Taoism, they're so old. And it's not only Confucianism and Taoism, but great philosophical wisdom traditions are enduring. As you know, in yoga, these kind of traditions are very enduring. And so they have the power to serve us more than ever. As you said, step up. It's time for us to step up. We've always been stepping up, but the fact is the stuff that we engender and understand is of great virtue now at a time of COVID and at a time when there's a big change in terms of this transformation and promotion of new kinds of medicines, reductionist medicines. But there are also these medicines that have been there under our kind of hands that are, that reinforce and support humanity.
Couldn't have said that any better. So fabulous. So if people want to connect with you, I'll include those contact details in the show notes and in the notes for this episode. It's been such an absolute pleasure to speak with you this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Oh, Karina, you're a star. I so appreciate your generosity and your interest.
Yeah.
You're very
Thank you so
welcome.
much. Oh, it's such a pleasure. This has been so wonderful. So I'm sure I'll see you again soon.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah. And until then, we'll say goodbye and thank you for listening to everybody that's been with us on this episode. Okay. Bye for now.
Yeah. Bye-bye.